can't fix a Land Rover without it. Oh yeah. Don't listen to the Germans. They drink tea. I think they're secretly English. Alright, now we've got the important stuff taken care of. We have a job to do. The D3. There's always a job to do. This vehicle is my nemesis. I love-hate it, like all Land Rovers. It's got some issues. And this one, the particular issue I have to deal with right now, is related to the brakes. When you brake, there's a crunchy noise. The crunchy noise is caused because an ounce of prevention saves about 14 tons of cure. And in this case, the brakes are every bit of the age of this vehicle, I suspect. They're probably not original discs, but they are certainly very, very well worn. And one of them has worn beyond limits. In fact, we've got metal on the... So here's the wheel in question, and we'll go in for a closer look and you'll see what the problem is. So there is the disc rotor, and you can see what should be a nice shiny smooth surface is scored all to heck, and that is simply because the pad has completely worn down and the metal backing of the brake pad is now rubbing on the disc rotor. That is not ideal, and I heard this probably 3 or 4 days before I did anything about it. I knew what it was. I knew that I was going to have to deal with it. The only working Land Rover we had, I needed to get to work. If your brakes are giving you problems, taking the brakes are the enemy of speed approach rather than brakes are a safety device, and I should do something about that. Yeah, look, I'm not trying to defend my actions here. I knew what I was doing. I knew that I was wrecking the brake rotor, but I also knew that the brake rotors on this vehicle are well and truly shagged, and we'll see that when they come out. All 4 of them are very, very worn, probably past limits, and have a major lip. You won't probably see it, but there's a massive lip on the edge of that disc, and the other 3 are the same. So, with that in mind, we have these. The brands are just the best ones that I could afford. I consider Bosch to be a good brand. I also consider DBA to be a good brand. It's Australian made. The TRW brake pads are pretty high quality, and I believe that TRW OEM replacement pad makers. I'd be interested to hear if anybody has an opinion on that. It's what I was told. Don't have any evidence for or against that. I've used TRW brake pads for years, and I've got no issues with them. They've always worked well for me. I guess we'll find out over time how these perform. So anyway, I've waffled enough. Let's get into it. So that's going to go on about there. There we go. So you want to loosen your wheel nuts while the tyre is on the ground. They can't go anywhere. Perched them down underneath there, and the handle, I actually don't know where that lives. This is highly unhelpful. And so if we take a look under our rear seats, excuse the dust and fur, and oh, Christian and Vera will have a field day with this. Look at all this dog here in the carpet. Anyway, what we need is our trusty rusty toolkit. It's actually not rusty. It's covered in crap though. Yep, we have dogs. I don't mind. It's a vehicle that we use. It's a family vehicle. The dogs are part of the family. They're hairy. No, I'm a bit hairy myself. So it is what it is. Alright, so here's our wheel brace. And jack, which just operates like that. So let's get into it. We have an affluent neighbour who likes to fly about in his helicopter while us mere mortals chug around in our Land Rovers, if we can get them to work. Fortunately, it seems that rather than fly round and round his property, which he does quite often, he's actually flying away. I'm sure it's a valid business expense. Step one is to get the actual caliper itself off. There's a framework around it, which is actually the carrier for the caliper. That's going to have to come off as well so that we can get the brake rotor off. But first thing we want to do is get the caliper off. We're going to have to then retract that piston that's inside the caliper so that the new pads will fit. That's going to force a bunch of fluid back into the reservoir, so we'll have to deal with that as well. Otherwise we'll end up spilling brake fluid all over the inside of the vehicle, and brake fluid is corrosive, particularly to paint. So 13mm on here to undo this one, and then there's another one further down on these slides, and then you'll see these little bellows, rubber bellow boots. These will sometimes seize, and in fact they can seize so hard that at times the calipers will actually lock in place, and then only one pad will break. It'll wear out that one pad, the other pad will be fine. So if you've got really bad uneven wear on your brake pads, just check that these are actually sliding properly. Okay. See the blue Loctite on there? We'll have to check, because sometimes the brake pad kits come with new bolts for that, and as you can see, that's actually sliding really nicely. So I'm just going to get the other one off, and then we'll pull the caliper out. We'll be back. Alright, so both those bolts are undone. The caliper's loose. Both of these slides are nice and free and easy, and they feel fine. Slide this caliper off, and instantly we've got a problem, because the last muppet to put brakes in this did a real number on the boot of the caliper, and that boot has actually been pinched and torn, which means it's not doing its job, which means I need a new boot, and possibly actually need to rebuild the caliper. That's very, very frustrating, because I don't have a boot, and I doubt it's an off-the-shelf item. It may well be, but that may have just put that job slightly out of my weekend ability. I'm just going to sit that there for the moment. It's nice and secure, it's not going to fall out of there. And we'll have a look at these brake pads. So, backside one, there's actually a wee bit of meat left in it, and that's not horrible. It's a Ferrodo pad, not too horrible. Alright, so we do actually have new replacement bolts to go in here in the kit, which is good. You can definitely see there's a fairly significant amount of meat missing from our old pad. This one, however, yeah, what I'm going to do is pull this carrier bracket off now. 15mm. These should be fairly tight. Alright, so that caliper boot, I can't do anything about that right now. It doesn't look like it's leaking internally, so I'm going to have to just see if I can find a replacement boot for that. We do have specialist brake shops in New Zealand. Safar Brakes is probably the best known one, so I might just see if they have a listing for it, or I may just take that whole caliper off and get them to rebuild it, just in case there's been aggressive shit in there. Alright, so the next step is that we've got a T50 Torx. There'll just be a little short screw in here which is basically holding this in place. There we go. So they're generally just a little stubby screw. Alright, so
Just a quick note from future me here. As I'm reviewing this video, I realised that what I should have done is loosen the handbrake off. You'll see this hole here. If you rotate the disc around so that that hole is at the bottom, you can insert a flat blade screwdriver and loosen off the ratcheting mechanism. It'll make taking this off much easier.
There's nothing that's going to go between. If there is, we'll deal with it when it betweens, but you won't get this off if your handbrake's on. My handbrake is not on. I don't use the handbrake very often. I live in a fairly flat place. There we go. So yeah, there's quite a lip on the inside of that drum face there. That is really bad. It's worn all to hell. There's a massive lip on the edge where it's actually worn down into it. This side is not too bad. And in fact there's not a huge lip on the inside, but the drum is quite lipped as well. Here's our nice new shiny one. Absolutely no lip there, and absolutely no lip there. So good as gold. I've already got a dirty fingerprint on there. Now these don't look to have an oil coating on them, which is unusual. I know some modern rotors use a different coating. It used to be that they would come in a bag full of oil. What we do have is a generic tin of brake cleaner. Really, brake cleaner is brake cleaner, and I'm sure someone will argue with that, but this stuff is 10 bucks a tin. CRC fancy stuff is 18 bucks a tin. Bendix stuff is 25 bucks a tin, and the more you pay for a tin, the smaller the tin gets as well. So I'm also going to give these brake shoes, which like I said they don't get used very often, the shoes are fine. I'll give that a bit of a spray down as well, just to get all the brake dust off it and clean it before it goes back together. So we'll just give these surfaces a quick clean with the wire brush, make sure there's no large chunks of crap on there. This is clean, this is clean. This looks clean, but it'll have oils on the surface, so we need to basically give that a clean as well. And I need a rag. Give that a wipe down. Here's the brake rotor. As you can see, it's picking up fingerprints already. Spray some of this brake cleaner onto the rag itself. Evaporates pretty quick. Alright. Alright, don't be afraid to give this a really good washing down. You do not want any shipping oil or protective coatings impregnating the disc pads or your handbrake shoes. Line up the countersunk hole with where the screw is going to go in. And there we go. Then this needs to go back on. Again, we're going to give this a wee bit of a tidy up. Mentioned it before, but just check that your slides are moving freely, no graunchy noises. Don't do that right beside your nice freshly cleaned rotors, but your mating surfaces are there and there, so give those a bit of a quick clean over. Just make sure that you've got no schmutz on them. So take the old ones off, put the new ones on, make sure you get them lined up how they should be. Right, here to just double check that the carrier is sitting neatly either side of the rotor, which in this case it is. Now these will need to be done up to the correct torque. Click! Like that. And then you'd know it's the correct torque because it made the noise. Next step is to just double check that there isn't an inner and an outer pad. So once you're happy that it's clean, new pad just slides in like that. Sits neatly against the disc. Alright, and there it is. The piston, this is the bit that moves when you are pushing the brake pedal. This comes out and squeezes together, and it can just float back and forth on those pins to centre itself neatly, which is why you've got to check these pins to make sure that they're not seized up or frozen. The next job is to get this piston back in there. If you have one of these tools, that's great. If not, some slip jaw pliers can be used to compress the piston back in, and a big syringe can be a super handy tool for getting the fluid out of the brake reservoir, because we're almost certainly going to need to do that. This is too hollow and too deep for the length of the thread on this tool, so I'm just going to use our old completely gone brake shoe to push against. And what you should see as this goes back in is the piston will start to move back in. Try and keep it centered. This one's not. If you're not centered, you run the risk of cock-eyeing the piston, and that's not ideal. The other thing I'm going to do before I push it back in is just try and get some of the dust off the outside of this piston, because there is a seal in here, and if I push that dust back in, if it gets past the seal, it'll ruin it. So we'll just try and clean that off as well. So it's requiring quite a bit of force. Now I'm not going to go too far without going and checking under the bonnet. Okay, so that's pushed it back a wee way. Let's check under the bonnet. Alright, so the brake master cylinder should be under here. Of course, if you're from Germany, this is not where you would expect to find it, because you guys drive on the wrong side of the road and your steering wheel's on the wrong side of the car. The minimum level's down under the seam, and the maximum level is actually a wee way up. We're only about halfway between the seam and the maximum level. So I'm going to keep winding that piston in, and you can watch me overflow my master cylinder by not keeping an eye on it. That is the piston as fully back as I can get it. That level's come up a little bit by the looks of things. That's okay, we're not going to have to do anything there. So we're as fully wound in as we can get there. It's not going any further. Which means the piston is probably as in as it's going to get. This is, as you're aware, completely knackered. So these boots concertina up nicely around the piston when they're done properly. But I suspect what's happened is that as this has been fitted at some point in the past, it's caught the rubber, dragged it across. This piece of the boot has gone right across the piston, and then under braking it's just squashed it flat and knackered it. There's no point trying to get too fussy with this now, because it is shagged. I'm going to have to find a new boot, or actually maybe find a second-hand caliper and then get this one rebuilt. I'm not happy with the state of that, but there's nothing I can do right now. I've basically got to get this back together. It's not going to affect its braking performance, it's just going to affect its long-term life. At this point, caliper needs to go back where it came from, and it should be now just wide enough, and I can actually see the problem they had, because I can see that that pad is actually pinching what's left of the rubber boot. But that's, I don't know, if it was done by someone in their home workshop, I can kind of understand it. If it was done by an actual workshop, well, that's pretty bad. And we're going to use the new bolts that came in the kit that have got some red Loctite already in the threads. You should always replace these bolts. Tweak these up to the correct torque. Click, click. Yeah, I know. Should be torqued proper. Review of what I've done and where I'm at before I start putting things back together. Irreversibly, well not irreversibly, but annoyingly. So what we've got is the carrier's back on. I have torqued the two 15mm head bolts on that up. I have torqued the two 13mm head bolts that hold the caliper into the carrier. So that's all on tight. I have put this back on and torqued that up. That is all back in place and should be fine. Happy with that. I'm going to put some anti-seize on these before I put this back on. Alright, some people will tell you not to do this, some people will tell you absolutely do this. You do you. I put anti-seize on the studs and I put a bit of anti-seize around here. If you don't want to, by all means, the world will not end. Use the genuine Land Rover tool just for fun. Nobody uses the genuine tool on videos, so there you go. You got to see a real Land Rover jack, a real Land Rover wheel brace. I'm sure you've been very impressed by it all. Right, I'll tighten this up on the ground. Alright, doggies and I are going to do a quick test drive. You ready, bud? You holding on? Bud's our barky underway boy. There's Ruby poking her head up. Arthur won't probably poke his head up, he'll just keep his head down. Ten acres of space and I've still got to back out this drive. I'll fix that one day. We're cunning plan for a roundabouty thing. But until then, too many Land Rovers, not enough space to turn around. It's feeling good, no crunchy noises. No cows coming either, which is good. Hanging on, bud. Alright, here we go. Now you may have, check your brake pads if you're doing this job, you may have specific instructions on how to bed them in. There was nothing specific on these. I've always used the get up to 80 k's and then brake hardish down to about 20 and do that 3 times. So hold on, bud. let it come to a complete stop. I'm sure there's a really good technical reason for that, and I can think of a couple of possible technical reasons, but by all means, if you know what the exact technical reason is, it's probably something to do with heat and scoring, and I don't know, make that up. Second one, hanging on, bud. He doesn't like braking in this truck because the seats, being leather, are very slippery, and he being fur is also very slippery. Alright, and the third one, and I think you're upside down. Let's try that again. Alright, well, that's it. We've bedded them in. There is no crunching noises anymore, which is good. At some point in the next couple of weeks I will try and sort out some time to do the other three. Excuse the noise, we just hit gravel. That drives me nuts. You got a D3, does your upper glove box rattle? Because this one does it. Absolutely does my head in. Anyway, we're just going to drive around for a bit, make sure everything is fine, and then head home for another coffee. Yes. And here we are after a couple of days of running the vehicle. My neighbour's out in his helicopter again, lucky bastard. Annoyed and jealous at the same time. But the rotor looks pretty good. It's polished up, it's nice and smooth, fairly happy with that. So we'll see how this goes, particularly, hang on. Never ceases to amaze me how I push record and he flies. Anyway, yeah, really happy with how that's looking, happy with how it's working. The brakes are spongy and unresponsive, just like they really should be on a D3. So I'm going to call that a win. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, or if you found it useful in any way, feel free to subscribe. I'll be putting up random content about Land Rovers and life on a lifestyle block. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.